Nick Lippis is the co-founder and co-chair of the Open Networking User Group, or ONUG for short, and is a world-renowned authority on advanced IP networks and their benefits to business objectives. In this conversation, we talk about the impact of artificial intelligence on network operations, cloud networking trends, enterprise operating models, and building the next generation of cloud network engineers. Nick Lippis, long time no see, but I will be seeing you next month, I guess. ONUG October. How's it going?
It's going great. Did you have a good summer?
It was. We got to take a nice, I think the first time in a while that I've actually taken a vacation and completely unplugged for like a whole week. I kayaked to Delaware with my kids and the family, like 16 miles with like a with a 5 and an 8-year-old, which took a really long time, it turns out, because the current wasn't, as strong as we would have liked it. But yeah, I
Yeah.
got a lot of outdoorsy stuff in, got detached. And what about you?
Well, at least you weren't going against tide, you and
I'm not
wind,
that brave.
and wind. Yeah, no, I've had a good summer, but it's really been kind of odd. With so much heat in the mid part of the country and the south, and in the Northeast, it's been cool. So we had kind of cool, rainy summer. It almost feels like we were in Seattle. Versus kind of New England. But besides that, summer's always great. Family, friends, fun. You know, it's all good.
Ah, awesome. Well,
Yep.
speaking of energy and heat and all those things, and again, these usually I like write down or jot down a few questions to like steer a conversation. You're an experiment, so this is going to be completely off the cuff. I think I have
Okay.
a few notes here, not very much. So I'm going
Hmm.
to jump right in. Um,
Perfect.
the
Yeah.
first thing that I think about nowadays is AI because you can't like even my grandma literally knows what ChatGPT is, which blows my mind still because she can't even install like updates on her computer. But she knows about this AI stuff. It's that polarizing. So
Yeah.
I know that crypto for like the longest time was in the news for a lot of the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Hardware, tons of hardware required, energy intensive. As it turns out, lots of GPUs are required for this proof of work consensus mechanism at scale.
Yeah.
So, the energy being on par with like smaller countries, which is just
Yeah.
like mind boggling when you think about it.
Yeah.
But AI is here, is also hardware intensive as well.
Yeah.
I love thinking about the opportunities and the innovation, but at what cost? So
Yeah.
what is your take on building something that is so dependent on like unrealized amounts of storage, compute, GPUs, and electricity to power all of it? And also, is this going to lead enterprises down the trail of investing into data centers again?
Yeah. I think so. I think they're already doing that. Frankly, I think there's been a shift right happening over the last probably 18 months time frame. But I think on AI, the one, I'm a fan. I know some are concerned that first it's going to take our jobs and then it's going to kill us. And I'm kind of not. I'm not in that camp, and maybe it's kind of ignorance is bliss. Kind of thinking. But I think it always tries to be so pleasing. It's like, oh, sorry, I didn't get that right. Let me try it again. So I kind of find the AI bots, as to be really friendly. They're really nice. And I think so. I think a lot of folks were exposed to AI with obviously with ChatGPT became the kind of the poster boy for like really what it can do, and it is pretty amazing. But also I've been driving a Tesla for about 11 years or so, and I think that's really going to be the big test. It's like when they go to 12.0 on FS, full autonomous driving, or I think it's called FSD. Then you really have kind of like AI controlling robots, and I think that's really where there's kind of rubber hits the road, and it's being able to do ChatGPT does LLM by kind of ingesting huge amounts of language, where sorry, where um, where full service driving is about AI ingesting huge amounts of real time video of people driving, and the times that they disengage and finding out why they disengage the autopilot. So anyway, I'm so sorry, I'm kind of going down a little bit of a rat hole here, but I'm a big fan. And I think where our industry, there's two things that I kind of look at. One is that for some reason, like, NVIDIA, they kind of adopted a proprietary fabric, and so I think that's kind of brain dead. I think that should be Ethernet. So I'm kind of I'm all there on kind of like changing that fabric to more of an Ethernet, based fabric, because I think that will fit better in with kind of existing architectures and data centers. So I think so that's one little nit, kind of like on kind of the hardware part of AI. The other thing, though, that I'm been thinking about, with AI is that one thing that we have in our industry is that every device that is part of a application's dependency map emits data, right? It emits some state. It's like, hey, okay, I'm up, I'm down, I'm running low on memory. I'm like, hey, I'm getting too many requests, so, and we are inundated by huge amounts of notifications. And that just seems really ripe for me for how operations groups can be really automated. And so you can imagine, like, maybe in the next 5 years is that we don't have these large NOCs and these large SOCs, but you basically have people overseeing a bunch of AI that's consuming a lot of those notifications. And then the AI is making suggestions, and maybe there's a couple of really smart engineers that are either saying yay or nay, to that. So I think really, to me, like where AI will impact our industry is really going to be on the operation side of things, and finally to do something with the petabytes of data that we get from all of these devices and services that are supporting an application. So sorry for the long-winded answer to your question, but that's kind of like my take.
That's a great answer, and it brings up a few good points. I think like that's been my sort of impression too. Like if where automation, AI, and networking sort of intersect, it's operations. Like you have all this data, you're storing all this data, you have so many different things logging in so many different formats. Well, who's to say that you need to log all of this stuff based on your operational footprint? Like, is just bringing everything in by default and trying to make decisions? Is that the right move? And using AI from the visibility, the operations, all the read only stuff where you're
Yeah.
not going to break anything if you start hitting buttons. I think it's just huge for disruption.
But the reason why, like, a lot of companies have to kind of like store all that stuff is for compliance, right? It's not like there's an audit trail, for compliance. But I think you can still have these two parallel things happening. You still store, these raw messages that you get, and so that means, like, obviously our storage requirements will continue to increase, whether those are in S3 buckets or whether they're like on site. But then, you can kind of split these messages. And so one is like, okay, kind of long term, cold storage, and the other one is really for processing, and the processing or the AI engines that kind of do that.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to think. I'm thinking broader than the networking piece of that. I think the networking piece is really important, but I also think all the security components that we have, the hosts and the servers, all the data that we get from the cloud providers, when you're hosting your applications there. So I'm kind of thinking that it's just everything that's in that supply chain or dependency map for the application. And then I think, kind of this should supercharge observability, right? You should be able to kind of, if you can, I guess there's like two things, well, that I'm thinking of. One is that we don't have in the industry a canonical data model for how all of these messages should be formatted. And therefore, how will an AI engine be able to kind of like parse that, process all that, where it's all these different, formats. Um, The other model is that you create all of these, modifiers, and so, lots of companies already do that. It's like they'll take particular sources of data, or emitters, and then they'll translate them into their proprietary. Maybe that might be kind of the way it goes, and that might be the differentiation from some companies that are really kind of delivering AI powered operations. It's like they'll provide these modules that do this conform, or translation, into a kind of proprietary canonical data model that the AI can actually use. So,
Yeah,
but
that's a good that's a good some good points. Yeah, I think about like if you think about like Chat GPT and some of these larger, Google has Bard and everything. These are these giant generalist almost language models, and then enterprise is sort of taking that. They want it to be private. They have their data sitting somewhere, and they want to do machine learning and provide intelligence based on smaller subsets of data more securely. Like, and so you have these smaller categories of models that are seemingly kind of where at least the enterprise is getting going to get value from as well. So if you're like if Nick Lippis is say that it's 2023 and you're a 24-year-old version of Nick Lippis, you're a Gen Z cloud network engineer, Nick Lippis. How 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 much time do you set aside to think about or learn about AI, or is it even on your radar?
I think it's on your radar, because like, it's for a couple of different reasons, right? Is that like, if you're doing kind of old-fashioned automation and you're writing scripts, you can actually have it test your scripts, or you can actually have it start to write your scripts and then you can review that, so depending upon how you want to proceed. Also, I think you should understand it because, like, even like in kind of policy as code and infrastructure as code, is that right now what we're basically doing is that we kind of try to create the kind of business logic, and then code that, and then we hope that that gets enforced, in the infrastructure. That's the way we've been dealing with it, but like AI can actually go the other way around, can actually be looking at all of these kind of emitters, and then suggest different policies, that might be better to be implemented. So, I think that's really important. I think, if you're it depends on what you're doing with as a network engineer. If you're doing configuration, if you're in the operations, a part of the kind of value chain of networking, then yeah, I'd be really looking at that and making sure that I became kind of an expert and kind of understood how I can better my career, by understanding, AI. Um, I think, there's for kind of network engineers who really understand design and architecture. Um, I don't. I'm hesitant to basically say is that AI will kind of do that job better than you in a period of time. I just think it's so complex to do that job, that it's hard for me to kind of imagine that, kind of a general purpose AI bot, could actually do that. So I'd be looking at it, and trying to understand better, how it's evolving and how it may actually impact, how I am doing my job and doing my work. But I would be using the tools every day. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So one, this is actually the just kind of thinking about you're involved in several different areas, whether it's like 5G, cloud networking, data center networking, security, observability. ONUG's grown quite a bit
Mm.
and some really distinctive areas, and technology's sort of evolved like so much. It's funny because it's like a love-hate relationship when I think about it. So like on one hand, I mean,
Yeah,
I it was just less than 5 years back, I think. I could be wrong when Microsoft started supporting BFD for doing BGP over
yeah,
express route to the cloud. Like you couldn't tune BFD from their end,
yeah,
and I'm like, okay, we're still dealing with BGP, TCP/IP. I feel like so much has changed, but at the same time, not a lot has changed.
yeah.
What are your list of exciting advancements you've seen this year out of networking?
Yeah, I think That's a loaded question. There's so many thoughts that are kind of going through my head. One is that I think the cloud providers don't understand networking. They understand it from, okay, how they can build or use networking to deliver their service. But in terms of the cloud providers being able to offer networking services that get corporations into their facilities with a wide range of options and be able to report back on them and to give visibility, I would say they get a failing grade there. And I don't see that changing at all. I don't believe that they really have much interest in networking and helping corporations deal with that. I think the other thing too that is really true is that um, cloud providers are very insular in that they don't really put much time and energy into multi-cloud. And you can understand why it's good for their stakeholders. It's like it's good for the project managers that need to offer differentiation. Um, so I think all of those issues that come out of that, observability, security, automation, connectivity, all of that shifts right. You've got to really own that as your corporation. And it's really the networking teams that are owning that now. So there's been, I think, an epiphany over the last year, and that is that we had, and we still do, we have these centers of cloud excellence. These are kind of the platform teams within corporations. And then there's two models that have emerged. So that group would either really just be focusing on developing applications and that they would rely upon the on-prem folks that did networking and security to service that application. Um, that model, many companies, were really thrown back with that model because the folks who are in charge of on-prem, they didn't want to do anything with the cloud stuff. They were like, okay, if that breaks, I don't want to be responsible for it. And so there was this big kind of separation between those two. And so some cloud providers then, or not cloud providers, but some central cloud teams would then populate their teams with networking and security people. And that seemed to help. But then you still have these two different groups and you never get this integration with cloud and on-prem, whether it's system integration or control integration. And then what started to happen more often than not is that an application would break that was being hosted in some cloud. And that the folks who were in those centralized groups didn't have the resources, the skill set to actually fix it. So they would go back to the on-prem folks and the on-prem, they would ask them and the on-prem folks would have to do it because like, okay, it's a revenue generating thing. It's the corporation, it's the brand, reputation, all that stuff. So they'd come in and they'd fix it. And then once it's fixed, they was like, oh, can you maintain that? Can you manage that? And so I think that happened enough, like thousands of times, within the industry across many different corporations, where now it's the networking teams that are actually stepping up to do cloud infrastructure. So um, so I think that's kind of interesting to me because that provides a path forward, a way in which we can progress around who owns what to do cloud stuff within a corporation. Okay, so you asked me, okay, what kind of advances in networking, am I kind of really interested in and excited about? I think probably one of the most, and it's a little controversial, but I think the whole NAS marketplace and its development to me is really fascinating. So NAS is network as a service, right? And there's multiple different forms that will take. Um, there are companies that are kind of in the startup camp that are offering NAS services. There are now the large service providers, telecom service providers that are starting to offer NAS. And then there's also cloud providers that are trying to offer NAS as well. And what's interesting, I think, to me is that this infrastructure that we're building now is programmable, meaning that the APIs that are being available will expose a lot of the underlying features within networking and offer that to consumers so that they can actually write directly to the network, or a developer can actually take some of these features and then incorporate them into their applications. The other thing too is that networking is now becoming more cloud delivered, right? So it's kind of a cloud delivery model. It's not like delivered by a cloud provider, but a cloud delivery model. And then also it offers the promise of being elastic, right? So it's like it can expand and contract, when you need it. That'll be interesting to see how that contractually kind of works out. But I think on the programmable piece of that, what's really fascinating to me is that um, the 5G community, the telecom community, actually did a really great job with that. And so, but it's not just for 5G, it's really for any kind of networking attribute. So this is really interesting in, for example, autonomous vehicles, updating mobility or IoT devices, being able to do reporting of IT devices, being able to manage those kinds of devices. So there's kind of a range of different applications that we couldn't do before that now we'll be able to do with NAS. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things. It's there's a question of what's the difference between a managed service and a NAS. And so my view on that is that NAS has a lot of these technical underpinnings where kind of a managed service is kind of just that. You basically are hiring somebody to kind of build a network and manage those components and supply you equipment. Where this is that there's some of that, but the most important thing I see is really the programmability aspect of it. So anyway, so there's this organizational thing that's happening within corporations, and then on the underlying networking infrastructure, there's the whole NAS activity. And I think with that too, there's also this integration of networking and security that are that we've been dancing with in the industry for some period of time, and it probably falls underneath the umbrella of zero trust. But I think what we're starting to see too is that many are starting to rethink operations. Is that why do we have a separate knock for a network? Why do we have a separate knock for security? Why don't we just have one knock that does incident response? And then we have these automation tools for orchestration and configuration to kind of establish, the network, but then to operate it, really, why do we need these different groups? So anyway, just a couple of things, William. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too long.
No, that's great. A little follow up. So, like you kind of alluded to, network and security engineering. Uh, when I started working in this industry, completely separate disciplines,
Yeah.
100% separate. Network wants everyone talking, everyone's happy. Fastest way to get there. Let's go. Security is a little more antisocial. They don't want anybody talking unless they say so. Do you see these towers? Like I've already seen this kind of happen myself a little bit, but it's interesting. Do you see these disciplines, at least on the network side of things, sort of converging into this, single team or single umbrella, like no more CISO, or maybe there is a CISO, but it's just on the data governance and other areas. What does that look like, you think?
I think you're right. So, one, I do see it. It's like, we know that some members are actually putting networking teams under security, under their CISOs, and then others are putting kind of security teams under their CTOs, which is usually where the networking team kind of comes in. So I think we're kind of in this experimentation, phase right now. But I think you're absolutely right. There are certain things of security that are inherently kind of network related, and those have been around for a long time. Like whether that's VPNs, whether that's firewalls, not load balancers, but IDS, IPSs, XDRs, and so forth and so on. Those are kind of inherent kind of technology of network and security technology integration. But the security teams do more, obviously a lot more than that. And so I think you're right. So around data governance is really a key attribute. The whole area of risk will more than likely stay within kind of the CISO or have a separate risk person. There's also kind of regulation compliance, as well. So I think there's always going to be that role for the CISO in those higher layer kind of business security business attributes. But I think there is an increasing amount of overlap between kind of networking and security teams. I think we're starting to see that the operational integration of those two, both around ops and also really around reporting structures as well. And the technology is moving there too.
Yeah, 100%. Well, so as a follow up, so kind of a follow up to that. So I feel like firewalls are never going to go away. I remember back when one of the organizations I worked for when I was on the enterprise side, I remember this hit piece article came out. This was in like 2014 or something, and I remember the title was "Firewalls Are Dead."
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, wow, they're dead. And then every year it just seems like it's more and more the traditional perimeter is
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah.
You know, I remember one was the wall has fallen. Zero trust architecture is going to save you. And that was like back in 2018.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in 2023, and I feel like enterprises are buying more firewalls than ever. Um, I think there was a
Yeah.
swing and a miss there. And I think it goes back to just my personal belief is, brownfield's brownfield. Brownfield applications, like if they, were built around a 3-tier architecture and there's firewalls and load balancers involved, it's a cost decision. Like, can we move this over to some new architecture that can use these new principles we have, yada, yada, yada. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's, a lot of analysts, will say provocative things, and that's okay. It just kind of makes the world go round. I tend to, agree with you. I loved your perception of networking security, where networking folks are really social and security folks are really antisocial. I really do like that. Actually, it has a ring of truth, associated with it. But I think like zero trust is really hard, and it's been around for 12 years, at least, and there's a lot of companies that are offering some really good solutions, to it, like Nutanix, has, and Zscaler, Zscaler in particular, has put a lot of energy and effort like into kind of zero trust models. Cisco has, as well. But what I've seen at ONUG is that many large corporations just struggle so hard with zero trust. Um, and so, and also since I think by far every corporation is multi-cloud, even though like they might be dominant on one particular, cloud provider. So the cloud piece of that, that boundary hasn't gone away, right? And when we first, everyone thought, okay, well the boundary is gone because of COVID, right? Because we don't need to have these data centers, we don't need to have these campuses. Everyone's like working remotely and so forth. Um, the problem is that when COVID hit, the knee-jerk reaction is everybody built what they knew and that they knew that worked, and that's VPNs. And those are just being dismantled, right? It's like they're trying to be dismantled. But that's basically what we're running on, these days for kind of remote access. So anyway, I don't see an end to firewalls. There is like one company that offered kind of a more distributed firewall, which I thought was kind of interesting, where you can, and this is more about kind of taking the control plane and aggregating the control plane of multiple different kind of firewalls, so you can program a kind of a firewall that's on-prem, and then also you can program firewalls that are like off-prem, like they're in cloud providers and so forth. So you have a kind of a consistency around policy, and then configuration and orchestration. I think so that doesn't say it's going away. It really says that it's really kind of here to stay, but like the way in which firewalls maybe were delivered, or will more than likely will change. They become more and more virtualized, and the aggregation around how we're programming them across multiple different vendors is becoming more and more realistic.
Yeah, good answer. I don't know, I find it so confusing these days too, that there's so many different, like the takes or the guidance for these things just keep changing, and enterprises are just in a constant state of trying to catch up. Like I was talking to just a friend of mine that actually works in the enterprise the other day, and he was talking about how like the technical chops, the individual contributor folks that really know the environment and like kind of know what they're doing, are just kind of getting beat down at this org because, they have like this, leadership change. They came down and they're like, okay, we're doing SASE, we're doing SSE. Our strategies are going to revolve around these things, square peg, round hole, hammer it in, let's do this in 8 months. And it's, of course, it's not that simple. And the ever evolving messaging, the ever evolving, this is what you need to do. It just changes so fast. And there's so many things. It would be tough to work in the enterprise security side these days, it
Yeah, I think,
seems.
when there's one thing that we're doing at ONUG in the fall is there's a kind of cloud native team, working group team, and that team is actually delivering a practical guide to zero trust. So, what's interesting about that is that we had the federal government do that a while ago. Okay, like, okay, this is kind of how you do zero trust if you're, in the federal system. There hasn't been anything like that for the large enterprise. So anyway, that group is delivering this, and so it's really on best practices based upon the experience of a couple of large consumers. So we haven't seen that, so and that'll be the first. And from everything I've heard from that working group is that yeah, this stuff is really hard. It's like there's no panacea, here. And so it's not too surprising that the firewall market hasn't like, all of a sudden disappeared and got away.
Yeah, 100. And those are some good points. And like what you said earlier, even like networking is so complex. You're talking about AI potentially taking over jobs and things. And I remember like when I first started working in tech, you would see so many folks that stay at like the same company, or maybe one or two companies their entire career.
Yeah.
Things have changed, let me tell you.
Mm.
There's a lot of jumping around quite a bit these days. How does that sort of impact building a solid operating model for cloud or even networking in general? You've got to retain some talent, maybe while bringing in new talent, but how do you retain that talent, or how do you, like, what's the play there?
Yeah, that's a really great question because like now it's not just a single person leaving, but it's usually a whole team. Will just go, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like, all right, how do I deal with this? And I think, the only thing that, makes sense, to me, in this is that you've got to be like the financials do a good job there because like the financials are compensated almost like high tech companies, right? Like everybody gets, not everybody, but like, if you're at a certain level, you get compensated with equity, and so that will keep you, there for, and yeah, obviously, well, for one, it will keep you there either. If you're really happy, you're going to stay there. If you're not, well, then you're kind of wait until like your share fest, right? And then you might leave, after that. But I think though, I think it's the compensation model, and then I think it's also too is that there is such a what's the word I'm looking for? It's not gap, but it's shortage. There's such a shortage like security engineers and networking engineers. So you really have to like compensate. So it's like the compensation models have really got to like change, and also the view of if you're working at a place where they don't view IT and and what you do as part of the digital ecosystem and supply chain that your corporation delivers, then you should leave. You shouldn't stay there. But if you're working at a company that, and it doesn't have to be a digital first company, it can be, it can be GM, where there are now everyone is like focused on okay, well, electrification and how do we now kind of deliver a better experience, different experience to our consumers, and it's a digital experience for them, and then you are part of that product. And so I think if you're in a corporation that is kind of a mindset of digital first, and that you're part of that digital experience, for your corporation, then I think that's a good place to be. So I think, no magic bullet there. I think it's really, that's kind of what I'm really thinking about, on that. I think on the skill set, side of it, I'm of two minds. Like one is that I thought the whole CCIE, specific vendor certifications, I thought that time had passed, but I see so many people still doing that, and what was great about that was that provided kind of longevity, security. That okay, I have these credentials, and then I can go to some other company that values those credentials as well. So I think that has long staying power in the marketplace, and I haven't seen anything really replace that um, of scale. You're right. Like yeah, there are alternative certifications you can get from a whole range of different suppliers in the industry and even the cloud providers. But the CCIE one, that one had scale and it had kind of universal meaning associated with it, and I think it's still valued today. I wish there was like in the industry a set of curriculum that said, okay, well, to be a network engineer, you need to have these credentials, and a security engineer, these credentials that are independent of any particular vendor. But I haven't seen that. They may exist, but I haven't seen that, in the market.
Yeah, I was listening to I can't remember now what podcast it was. It was I think last year sometime, but whoever it was, I'm gonna have to find it and put it in the notes. They were talking about like how like other trades, if you look at like electricians, you have apprenticeships, you have these all these boxes you have to check before you're actually going into a home or a building and doing real things on your own. Whereas, in the technology side, it's like, hey, oh, like here's your laptop. Oh, you have like half of your accounts. Hey, jump on this severity one issue and start troubleshooting, fix us.
Yeah.
And okay, like, yeah, with what are your qualifications to do that though? Oh, you have a certification. All right. But if you think about the gap across trades, like if you mess up something in a house and the house burns down, and kills someone,
Mhm.
potentially the stakes are so much higher. Is does technology need to sort of follow suit like in that direction more?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like that. We've had this discussion in the industry many times, where, okay, is this kind of a trade, or is this, you know, like you don't need an undergraduate degree to be a network engineer or a security engineer. At least 2 years of kind of community college, I think would be helpful, and then a range of certifications. And I think that's a really good thing for the industry because that you really look at it, it's like our industry lifted up a lot of families, and provided them really good salaries to raise their families and to and support them. So I think there's a lot of good, that has transpired with our industry. I think on the trades, you're right. I think there's more of a risk profile there where you can do actually physical harm. Um, Maybe that's changing, because as the more, for example, as OT and IT becomes increasingly integrated, and we're going to have a really good keynote on that. It's going to be with GSK. They're talking about how all of their OT devices, which used to be air gapped, are now going into their enterprise and how they de-risk that. But then, that's the manufacturing floor for, pharmaceuticals, so you can see that could be, a hazardous, area. So you would think like the skill sets that we acquire in our industry, do we need to start doing some kind of licensing? That you need to get a license to practice this. And I don't know the answer to that. I can see kind of arguments on both sides of that. It hasn't traditionally, we haven't traditionally needed to do that. But maybe I don't know. Well, I guess we're gonna need a major catastrophe, to kind of like to
Yeah.
force that. It's like because it's a huge undertaking, to ask everybody to one develop a curriculum, get certified, get your license. So there's going to be the need for a real, big blow up in order to kind of move the industry in that direction.
Yeah. I can't imagine, to be honest. And I think about it in terms of like, okay, you see all these hospitals getting ransomed. I feel like I read about a new one every day. We had a major hospital system in Louisville recently that
Hmm.
got ransomed. It was all over the news. And, just thinking about that, like, would, the type of system we're talking about, would it have prevented some of these, ransomware attacks from being successful? If the answer is yes, maybe, just kind of figuring that out is just a big task in and of itself. But like, what would be the impact of having that? Like, would our current state be any better? And it's hard to really evaluate that, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. Hospitals are also like, notorious for like, not investing much into IT, not to say that they deserve anything, I'm not kind of going anywhere near there, but they have a good reputation there. You know, uh,
Yeah,
you know,
I concur.
yeah, that, and also it's an odd thing, legacy retail, as well, because their margins are so small, right? Technology is really expensive to them, so they've had a tendency to also kind of devalue IT and try to get it away as little as possible.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think we're
So
both in
yeah,
agreement. Not going to happen anytime soon.
yeah, totally. So ONUG is right around the corner, like we talked about at the beginning, October 24th and 25th.
Yep.
I feel like historically the theme of ONUG was like, in the humble beginnings, like an SD-WAN trade show in a sense.
Yeah.
Things have evolved though,
Yeah.
in a major way. There's lots of other stuff going down. So if you had to give, your quick elevator pitch right now to someone that's on the fence about coming, why is it going to be valuable to them to attend ONUG in New York this year?
Yeah, I think it's well, one, you're right. We started actually we started even before the SD-WAN market, but we actually created that market, right? And which was really great. And actually, the one person there's a lot of people who contributed to that, but one person in particular is a guy named Mike Elmore. Mike he was the CISO, or I think he ran infrastructure at Cigna at the time. Mike came in and gave this private presentation. It had to be around 2014 or so. And it was about why he's doing SD-WAN, who he's doing it with, and what value he's getting. And he got peppered with a whole bunch of questions. Oh, why you're putting a lot of, your business like with this startup company, it's like, are you concerned about the risk, unproven technology and all that stuff. So Mike actually talked a lot about that, and I think he wasn't trying to convince anybody, but he basically just talked about why he's going down that road. He's actually going to be doing the same thing at this ONUG, but he's really going to be talking about something called the distributed edge kind of computing, or DES, or DEC. No, DES. Sorry about that. Distributed edge system. And in there, what he's done for GSK, so now he's the CISO at GSK. He's combining OT and IT together, and he's de-risking that platform really through microsegmentation. So we think that that's really kind of a fascinating kind of discussion, point that he'll lead the charge. How do you have one infrastructure for both your OT and your IT devices, and why do you want to do that, and what's the value associated with it? So anyway, I think that's really going to be great. If I bubble up what this ONUG really is all about, it's really about, okay, everyone's doing multi-cloud. You need to connect into these clouds. You need to secure those connections across those different cloud providers. You also need to observe. So automation is like the top issue at this ONUG. Yeah, there'll be some AI, sessions that we'll focus on, and the other one is around control. How do you kind of control this? So it's, I think, in a kind of microcosm, we're thinking about what does the enterprise look like in 5 years from an operational kind of point of view. And so we'll spend a good amount of time talking about this knock SOC moving towards an incident response center. We'll also talk about these operational models that are now coming down. That's the rise of network engineers. And as they take over cloud infrastructure and they integrate that with on-prem, what are the new tools that they need? What's the best practices? What's, where do they get the know-how to do that? And they're kind of charting a course, so we want to empower them. So, sorry, that was kind of really much longer than just a second.
Yeah, you stay the elevators opening and closing, and you're still,
Still talking.
pitching. I like it. Excitement. Uh, yeah. I mean, I gotta say, like one thing about ONUG for me, just personally, the collaborative is probably one of my favorite parts as a practitioner because, I've gotten to meet a lot of people, a lot of great and talented people. Both from the consumer side, the supplier side, and work together on some great things. Set aside anything other agendas we may have and come together and work on something bigger. And I think that's really really awesome as far as like building a community that's useful. Even the getting to participate in the cloud white paper or the cloud playbook that we published. It was really awesome. Good experience.
Yeah, well,
So yeah, I'm looking forward to fall.
and that's getting updated too. So there'll be kind of an update to that, and I think that group, kind of the network cloud group. So yeah, they're going to be publishing, putting a nice crisp definition around NAS. What is it, and what are the consumption models, associated with it. So
Awesome.
anyway,
Well, where should folks find you if they want to find you on social?
oh, I'm on. Actually, I only usually use LinkedIn and Twitter, or X. Now those are kind of the two social places that I'm kind of hanging out these days. There, and then also up on the website, onug.net, and just register, get yourself in there. We'd love to see you all, be part of the community and join us in Manhattan. I love Hudson Yards, where we're going to be. It's such a happening, area. So new facility as well, which is like really great. I wasn't that happy with where we were last fall, so we made a really nice upgrade change. So
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll have the links to your social and the episode notes along with links for ONUG and registration. Yeah, I can't wait to come back to New York. I found this uh, one of my colleagues that works out of New York. I'm a pizza junkie. I love going different places and eating the pizza. It's a problem, but John's Pizza of Bleecker Street
uh,
is it's so good.
uh,
Like I'm excited for the technology, but I feel like I'm gonna try and like cut out some time to go in there alone and just eat this
you
pizza.
have
I
to.
probably will.
Yeah,
We'll see.
that's New York is like such a great place. It's like you got all those, not only just the pizza, but like if you can, like a lot of folks will, bring their spouse, with them as well, and so like they'll take in, 1 or 2 days and take in some plays and do some sightseeing and shopping. It's like, yeah, it's a great place.
For sure. Well,
Excellent.
thank you for coming on, Nick. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, William. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.